Did you get the thing?
Yes, I got the thing.
Feed the dog?
Yes, I fed the dog.
Did you download the episode?
Yes, I downloaded the episode. What's up with the questions? Can we just go, please?
Permit me here and now to promise as a good comrade and a fellow artist that I will not report any of this, whatever it is, to the police.
Welcome to Abandoned Albums, the documentary podcast. Each week, our intrepid group of researchers and archivists sift through the album crates of the world, finding those records that may have been lost over time. Our team also seeks out up-and-coming artists with work we feel you should know about. When we're lucky enough, the artists swing by Thunderlove Studio to chat with our hosts Keith R. Higgins and Jeff Calhoun about those albums and their careers as a whole. Sit back, relax, and thank you for joining us.
Chris Enriquez is one of those guys. You know the type, talented, driven, and fucking good at everything they do. As a drummer, he began his career fueled by a healthy diet of classic rock, glam metal, and punk rock. After zeroing in on punk rock, he found a home playing with the influential Long Island hardcore band On the Might of Princes. He's also sat in with artists like Criteria and Supertouch, and Chris has been the drummer for far too many other bands to mention. But drumming is not all Chris does. He's a writer, a rock and roll writer who pens for magazines like Revolver, Brooklyn Vegan, and Alternative Press, among several others. His CV is longer than a receipt from CVS. With the release of Hold On to a Time, a documentary about his first band, On the Might of Princes, we can now add filmmaker to Chris's ever-expanding resume. Partnering with his Spotlight's bandmate, Mario Quintero, the two have crafted one of the most interesting and engaging music documentaries of the year. The two directors have stitched together an illuminating film about On the Might of Princes, a band that influenced and continues to influence the hardcore scene. Tragically, On the Might of Princes is one of those bands that danced on the edge of success and imploded before they had an opportunity to reach critical mass. Hold On to a Time stands as evidence that the band definitely would have. Chris stopped by Thunderlove Studio to talk with Keith and Jeff about the film, the hardcore scene, and On the Might of Princes. Here are the guys talking with Chris Enriquez.
It's just the normal noises in here.
Hey, buddy.
Nice to see you.
Keith, meet Chris. Chris, meet Keith.
Greetings.
Let's set this stage. Chris, you played in the band On the Might of Princes for, what was the total run? Was it a full decade? When did it start, I guess? Because I know when it ended.
Yeah, so the initial run, which really is the true time frame of the band existing, when we were touring and putting out records, was from 1997 to 2003. Actually, I'm sorry, 2004. 1997 to 2004.
That covers really fertile ground musically as far as the landscape. Whatever is out there in the ether as influence for young bands, and you guys were young when you started the band. It's interesting that in that era, you really can categorize bands into leaders and followers. There were bands that you could listen to and go, oh, I hear X, Y, and Z, and it was very clear who the influences were. But there were also a lot of other bands that were breaking new ground and tuned into something that was really more inspirational in its own thing. And On the Might of Princes were one of the leader bands, one of the bands that influenced others as far as the sound goes. But it certainly comes from a place, I think, of that New York hardcore scene.
Absolutely. I think, thank you for saying that, by the way. What you said is exactly what I was also trying to convey in the movie, is that we were kind of crossing over from a time period in which the genres of music that we were inspired by were not mainstream music at the time. So the creation and thought process of making this music with our friends, was not business oriented in any way whatsoever up until it did become that, because the generational gap there is very unique to our story, I think, because the bands that came before us, which you could argue maybe would be like, Sunday Real Estate or Drive Like Jehu, or sort of like Quicksand and other things that like kind of float in between. Obviously some of those bands were on major labels and on MTV and all that, but not necessarily Sunday Real Estate, which I think is a key band. That's a great example for where we kind of got our sound from initially. And then after us, or during our time, we're entering a world of My Chemical Romance and Taking Back Sunday and Brand New and all that. And those are bands that we played with that were opening up for us. Not all those bands, but some of them. Coheed and Taking Back Sunday and Brand New certainly did. And so like the playing field was one that we were not prepared for, because we also didn't expect it, and then we had to figure out what to do with it, and then that caused a lot of confusion, amongst the band, because especially at a young age, for me, I just assumed that anybody I was going to play in a band with wanted to make it as big as possible. That wasn't necessarily the case, and that sort of showed in where everyone's lives ultimately went. Like some of us became teachers, some of us ended up becoming blue collar dudes, and some of us, like myself, ended up in the music industry, both on and off stage. So like we just were dealt with a lot, and so I think our sound was extremely organic. And also in regards to genres, that was also a time frame where, you guys know, many people were not comfortable publicly declaring their genre. So, you didn't really ever hear any of the bands from the 90s like outright say, we're a grunge band, we're an emo band, we're a screamo band. And it was part of rebelling against the idea of falling into a paint by numbers sort of box, because then you're just sort of one thing. So we were definitely of that ideology, even though I think we all kind of knew at the core of the end of the day what we probably were perceived as, but I definitely think the New York hardcore influence was inevitable for like the attitude, and also those were the shows that we were exposed to, which differentiates our sound and vibe, to like what was going on in the Midwest, with the emo scene, was There was more mosh pits at our shows and people singing along and stage diving. And, even those guys that were at those New York hardcore shows would be at our shows, like hugging and crying. And like, it was like a place where they could feel sensitive, whereas they might've been at Madball the night before. So like that would definitely like is extremely different thing for what was happening in our scene than like going to see the Promise Ring or something like that in Chicago.
Thank you for the beautiful segue into my next question. I want to talk about the importance to the local scene, because the role Long Island itself plays a role. Long Island is almost a character in this documentary. And it was very clear to me that the role that On the Might of Princes played locally was equivalent to, if you were from Milwaukee, your band was the Promise Ring. And if you were from Sacramento, you were a Knapsack fan. And if you were from Omaha, you were a Cursive fan, right? There were these like microcosms of scenes that had their own most important band in the world. And you guys were it in Long Island, I felt.
It's tough to say. I think that we were definitely for like a group of people. And I think that like in the grand scheme of things, the bands like Taking Back Sunday and Brand New sort of carried the torch for people in that would hear the name Long Island. The first things they think is Glassjaw or those bands that I just mentioned. And it's because we didn't reach the level of success that those bands reached, because we broke up right at that time frame when like the levee really just burst open, So, it's something that I think, depending on who you ask, some of the people in the film that we interviewed were, Angie from she plays drums in Sleater-Kinney now, and she was like a kid that came out and watched us play. So there was a purpose in asking her to speak in the film as much as there was to ask like Iron Sheik or a lot of those people that we felt went on to do bigger things that are still connected to us. I don't really have a relationship with the bands that I mentioned earlier as much as the people I invited to be in the film, but I definitely can recognize that there are still, people out there that I'm hearing about that are in new bands that I've become familiar with, that are in their 20s, that are name dropping us in their interviews, whether it's on Alt Press or wherever they're doing stuff. So I pay attention to that stuff. And I feel like every time I hear anybody talk about us, it's extremely validating because of the time that we put in. It was not a band that we just sort of threw out there. We worked hard, you know what I mean? We went through a lot, and that's kind of why I felt like making a movie felt appropriate, especially because our singer passed away. So that made me feel like not weird about doing it, because there was a fallen soldier, so to speak. So there's something that makes me feel better about pumping the band up. Normally as a member of something, it's kind of like awkward to do that, but I feel like I'm doing that to honor a person that I think it was really the main reason, to be quite honest with you, that like we existed and sounded the way we did. He was the architect of the whole thing, and he's not represented or held up in the regard that I think he should, because he brought the Midwest emo sound to Long Island because he lived there and he lived through it at a certain point in his life. And when he brought it to Long Island and decided to play that music with us, the combination of it all, I think it did inspire something after that. So, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, I don't know that I get the chance to talk about it that often. So it feels good to get that opportunity.
I didn't go to Vietnam just to have pansies like you take my freedom away from me.
You went to Vietnam in 1993 to open up a sweatshop.
And a lot of good men died in that sweatshop.
Oh my God, you're out of your mind.
Look. The first question I want to ask you, Chris, is you directed this with Mario Quintero. Did one of you go to film school?
No, not even. Not, and we've never done this before in any shape or form. Basically, so Mario is a audio engineer, and he also does front of house. So, basically his editing skills and his sound engineering skills are kind of similar in the process of making a film, in the sense where like you're cutting and pasting clips from interviews, flyers, live footage, and then of course you're splicing in the sound and doing all that. So like I kind of had this foresight, having worked with him on music, that when I wanted to do this documentary, that the process probably wouldn't be too different, while challenging still, that I thought we could pull it off, as long as I sort of provided the appropriate material for him to work with and sort of guided him through that. So he really handled the technical aspect of it, and then I sort of handled the storytelling, piecing together of events to make it a story.
The band is the topic of the documentary, but Jason is clearly the central character.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he's not around, so we had to like we've had only a few interviews that we were able to like find through old YouTube videos, contacting people, and so it was tough. But his mother did a wonderful job of like filling in some gaps, and we did our best.
Jason Rosenthal, who we're talking about, the lead singer. As I watched the documentary, I get a sense from Jason, one of two things, and I'm hoping you can shed a little light on it. Either he was afraid of success, or he was just so committed to this punk ethos that he was, didn't want to color outside that line. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I want to, tread lightly in like, so that I'm not speaking on behalf, of him, like in a way where I feel like I'm the right voice to do that. But, from my perspective, that's definitely what it felt like at the time. And we're talking again, like 20 somewhat years ago. So the mindset and the things that are around us are different. It's not necessarily something that people around us in our scene at the time are excited about. There's an element of pushback from the people that have been supporting us and seeing us playing in basements and VFW halls, that like we're now that we're talking to labels and entertaining the idea of going outside of the box, that we're committing a crime here, so I think that's partially in his brain is an element of that, but also he definitely was not as like privileged, I would say, as most people around us in the scene at the time. Certainly not as much as myself. I'm not afraid to say that. Like I came up in a good family. There was never any like financial struggle. Certainly was not the case for him. So I think he took a lot more pride in what he did in every single aspect of it, because nothing was handed to him. So like he was very precious about and meticulous about every single thing that his art touched. So, it would be one thing for me as sort of like a more business savvy person to like say, hey, this major label wants to like talk to us and sit down. And for me to just be like, yeah, let's just do it. But in his mind, I think, he has more questions and wants to know what that what comes with that, whether it's good and bad. So it's a smart way of looking at things, but there was a pull and push going on between him and me, and I think the band in the middle was sort of divided in how to handle that. So that's ultimately why things sort of ended up the way that they did. And now that we're doing it again, I feel like there's a lot of greatness that stemmed from where things ended up, as opposed to being bitter about it, because it's something that isn't common to like come back from 20 years later and then be able to play shows and have younger people come up to you and show appreciation for it. So I think that what we did, the way that we did it, wasn't compromised. I don't know that the meaning of our band would be what it is today if we went on and were like this like gigantic arena band, you know.
You have been really generous with yourself, with sharing your life. You know, obviously with spotlights, you know, you're going on massive world tours and, you know, opening for Mr. Bungle. And you have always been really open about your sobriety. And I wonder if your own journey to get sober and the value that that has brought to your life colored the documentary, because it, you know, you mentioned in the documentary, Jason struggled with drugs and alcohol. And did your path to sobriety influence how you presented that information and told that piece of the story?
For sure. And I have to like also say, I mean, there's also, how do I say this? So like my path to sobriety at the time was basically a lot of drugs that I was doing. And I think that alcohol led to a lot. I mean, generally, when you're dealing with drug use, it's usually alcohol that is sort of bringing you to the point where you're going to go do a line or do something that you probably shouldn't be doing. And so I went through years of struggle where it was like 7 months I was sober, fell off, 8 months sober, fell off, year and a half, and then I did like a stretch of 4.5 or something like that. So it took a long time, and the drugs were really sort of like the main issue for me. And so 4.5 years of that sort of taught me to like basically like question the types of people that I was surrounding myself with, more so than like the isolated idea of like what was causing me to do all this stuff. It was really kind of like being around people that weren't supportive or caring about what would happen to me. And so once I was able to navigate that, you know, I was able to kick my drug habit. I do drink now. You know, I feel like weird that I sometimes put a lot out there and then people find out that I actually drink, but then, and who, especially people that were inspired to get sober that find that out. But I think everyone's journey is different. You know what I mean? Like if your problem is that you have some dark stuff going on in your life, like I see a therapist twice a week now. So I've like done everything I could to work on my mental health between like NA meetings, AA meetings, you know, sober therapists, regular therapists. And so I kind of just boiled it down to like, what's going on up here? Why am I doing this to myself and the people around me? Who am I surrounding myself with? And I was able to find my sweet spot where I can enjoy a glass of wine at dinner with my wife and not feel like I'm going to, you know, do an 8-ball in the bathroom afterwards because, you know, I'm not hanging out with people that are encouraging me to do that. So, so I just wanted to get that out of the way because, you know, I'm not like textbook sober right now, but I am not doing hard drugs anymore. That's, and I feel like, saying that here for anyone watching too is probably also helpful to anybody that is struggling because, you know, you definitely have your own, everyone's story is different. Like what's going on in your head is different than what's going on in my head. Some people need to be completely stone sober, and some people need to identify like, oh, I have a heroin problem. That's what I need. Is alcohol leading me there, or is it like I need to see a therapist because there's something in my past that makes me want to do that? So I just needed to find my sweet spot, I guess. But yeah, Jason, I think so. Kurt Cobain is an interesting topic because he's the most widely known person that publicly struggled with these types of things, that was attached to the style of music that's kind of adjacent to what we're talking about. So anybody that goes through anything like this, immediately we're going to think about Kurt Cobain. And I'm a huge fan, but there's also like a million Kurt Cobains that we haven't heard of. And so I think, it's a fair comparison because it really like was similar, without even totally understanding what Jason was doing or why. Because I didn't get started with my drug habit or any of that stuff until way later in life. When I was in the band with him, I didn't actually know everything that he was doing. I just knew that like he was a little like out there and not always, able to see the straight path that I wanted to go down with him. But his life was probably extremely similar in the sense of like broken home, other things going on that like are living out of his car for a while. There were things going on that like I think were comparable to like a Kurt Cobain character that like led to the tortured lyrics and the art that was the way it was, and the delivery of the vocals and the stage sort of show of just breaking shit. So he had that for sure, without a doubt. That the way his life ended definitely wasn't the same, which we clarify in the movie, was not drug related or suicide related or any of that. But, there's definitely like a tortured soul. And I think that he used this as a vehicle to find some sort of like therapy in whatever he was struggling with, I don't know if that answered your question, but that was a lot of information. But yeah,
absolutely. Well, and it's important, I think, for me, very parallel to Cobain, where you could see the torture was a part of. I don't want to say it was the driving force behind the art, but it was a part of what was informing his perspective, and he just never figured out how to overcome it. So to me, one of the reasons that the band was never able to stay together and achieve and realize its full potential, because you guys were so close. You were so like, you were peering over the edge of like, oh, there's all that pile of money. Yeah. I don't think you can tell his story without acknowledging that.
Yeah. I mean, like, he was definitely like, okay, the only person that I ever played with, not only in that band, but like ever, who would literally be in tears while he was playing, or just like middle of like recording a song, have to go for a walk or just be outside like in tears about something, And I know that sounds really cliche in like the category of music that we're often like thrown into, but it's totally what was happening. I mean, like we were with a guy that produced Sirens, our last record, the other day at the film premiere, sort of like reminiscing at the after party of like what that was like. And he was recounting sort of like Jason writing lyrics and singing them and getting frustrated and then tearing up and going outside and having to calm him down. And it was a very dramatic process, which I also think is also age too. You know what I'm saying? When you're in he was 2 years older than me. So, and the rest of the guys were a little bit older than me. So, we're between the ages of 19 and 25 is the age gap when I joined the band. And then as we keep going, the age gap continues to go up that ladder. So like we're all young and are not really truly in touch with ourselves, I think, and trying to understand how to deal with the struggles that we're talking about, which, 20 years later, we're still sort of figuring that out and seeing therapists and deciding when to be sober and when not to be sober. So, when you're half the age and you're trying to figure that out, and you're in a band that people actually give a shit about and on a record label, and you're like, you have an audience that's listening to you talk about your life struggles, then it's a dramatic experience, and it's not necessarily always contrived. And I think he was definitely a very non-contrived example of that. You know what I mean? Some people use torture as a way to create theater. Like, he was genuinely upset. You know what I mean? Like, this is genuinely a guy that was like frustrated about something, and writing those songs was always a struggle, because I don't think that he had any other way of getting out any of that shit, because we didn't have even like the kind of relationship that you might have with your best friend. I don't know if he did either with anybody else, where you kind of call up your homie and be like, this sucks, my girl left me and I'm like, down the dumps or whatever. Like, nobody had that relationship with him. And I couldn't tell you why. We did with each other, but we just didn't with him. It was like not an easy relationship to have with him. And you just really knew that he was upset or not happy a lot of the time with something at different stages going on in his life. He had joy here and there. I mean, I have, good memories, but like, he was definitely somebody that lived with frustration.
I have a question about, suddenly I got a Canadian accent. I have a question about...
Take off, eh?
There are a couple of things conspicuously absent from the movie. And one of them is you bookend the film, spoiler, with 4Meg. But there's no acknowledgement as to who she is. There's no interview. There's a picture. So presumably the way it's cut, it's a real person. I guess I'm curious to know the thought process behind her not being in the picture.
It was a choice that she had made, that she didn't really feel comfortable being in it. I feel like I can't speak for her, I can only speak from my perspective, but like, when they were together during the band time, like, they were definitely like, it's probably a traumatizing experience for her, the whole thing. And then knowing that he had passed away has to be even more traumatizing. And that's just sort of my take. It's not speaking for her. She's not like told me any of this, but like, I think that like what brought them together from my observation as a spectator in the band at the time, like, I think that they were drawn to each other based off of trauma, and that the two of them together, not unlike a Kurt and Courtney or a Sid and Nancy kind of thing, like, just not famous, I guess, but like, they kind of had that sort of thing where they were drawn to each other and things were chaotic, and you couldn't she was at practice, she was in the studio, they at shows, you never knew if there was going to be something happening that like might be a little dramatic, where one of us might have to intervene and see if she's okay, and physically get her into the room so they could hash something out, and like, it was like that sort of type of thing. And now that she is an adult with a family, and I won't get into her personal life, I think it's just sort of like a chapter that probably is just filled with trauma, and like, not something that she wants to open a door of, which I know a lot of people, they weren't married, but I just know widows and people that I know that like have moved on and started a new life. And so going back to a part of their life to discuss somebody that they were with that is no longer here is very tough, I would imagine. And so that's kind of why I think she didn't want to, but she gave me permission to use those photos and to mention, that they were best friends. They were dating, but I think it was because that was something she was more comfortable saying, because, who knows when they were together, I don't know for what period of time they were just not labeling it and like friends. But that song, from what I understand, was a birthday present that he wrote for her and about her that was based off of personal experiences that they had. So like, you know, it became our sort of anthem. You know, yeah.
So there's a moment in the film, you know, I mentioned how close you were to breaking it big, and you do a great job of teeing that up and saying, okay, well, we were talking to this record label and they were going to pay off our debts and they were going to set us up with a van and they'd set us up with this tour and we were going to play in this great record store. And then Jason kind of had a spin out. And in that moment, you can kind of put your finger on it and say, well, that was kind of the beginning of the end. The documentary mentions he traveled to Florida to visit an ex. And I've just got to ask, was it Meg?
No, it wasn't. It was somebody else. But she was like the main thread of like, they were together for the most out of everybody he was with during the band's existence. But so you're right though. That was the beginning of the end, because when we actually had the labels reaching out to us, he had a lot of financial debt because he was not, you know, he didn't have the family support that like the rest of us did, which is not to say that like any of us were just sort of like being given handouts, but you know, like just to paint a picture, you know, Tommy, our bass player, was a social worker working with autistic kids for the entire time that we were a band. And you know, Lou was our guitar player, was a janitor from the time that I met him up until recently. He's been a janitor, and he is I think he's in construction now. So he's like a blue collar dude that was like living in his parents' basement at the time, and now is living in like the woods in a cabin. He's like a real like man, you know, the kind of guy that chops wood out in the backyard of his cabin, that kind of guy. And I was a product of parents that were very business savvy. So I had a lot of intelligence through my mother and father, who were, my mother was working in research at NBC. My father was an accountant at Avis. And so I just, aside from being a musician, I felt like I had the foresight on how this band could make money and be successful and have a marketing plan. And I knew what our demo was, all of those things that eventually spilled into my full-time career at Revolver and Alt Press and all the brands I work for now. But Jason, on the other hand, was working, you know, Guitar Center job, you know, when that didn't work out, he would end up at like, you know, Borders and Books, and he would end up at like a coffee shop or something. And even though I had jobs like him at the time and we would cross over, I still had a family to go home to. He had, late rent. Maybe he couldn't make rent at that time of the month. He didn't have the same privilege to like call up a family anytime and be like, can you wire me some money? I can't make rent this month. So his reality is quite different. And so when the labels are hitting us up, and there's one in particular, Drive Through Records, who were a subsidiary of MCA, you know, that was offering us the most promises financially and just on the grand scheme. You know, this was an open door for all of us to finally maybe think that there was a future for us financially speaking, you know. So once we realized that like that wasn't happening due to like bands that I really can't say who, but like, because I have to be careful with like, you know, the fact that I work in the industry now and I'm totally cool with these people. But at the moment now, I'm like, we've moved past all that, which is why I left the names out of the movie. But
the movie makes it sound like there was a specific band that torpedoed your opportunity.
It was a specific band, and it was people sort of behind the scenes in our scene that were connected to the sort of the imploding machine that was happening at the time. Like there was a lot of people that got famous around us at that moment, from Long Island and Jersey and everybody that we were sort of sharing bills with. And like, we just kind of were always like in some sort of like drama with like another band or that band. And sometimes that would happen. It happened quite often because Long Island, especially, kind of was plagued with like really shitty like bro mentality. That's been documented in various forms. Like I know Kerrang did a article that you could look up where it's talks about toxic masculinity and sexism in the Long Island scene, and it actually like names bands and cites lyrical content of bands that whether they realized or not, were condoning like really shitty behavior. So it was just like, I don't think that I learned later on that wasn't like that in other cities. Like when I played drums in Criteria briefly in 2006, and that was my first foray leaving Long Island. And I went to Omaha and got to hang out with like the Saddle Creek type people. And I was blown away by how nice and genuine and supportive everyone was. That was extremely foreign to me. That was not the way that it was, in my opinion, in Long Island. It was very competitive. What can I do to sabotage this person's opportunity so I could one up them? And, or like it becomes this, like, they're going to open up for us. It was just it comes with the territory. Long Island has a chip on its shoulder. And once you get a taste of success, that chip on your shoulder then I think made you competitive with your own peers, which was really unfortunate. And I don't think that we were completely guilt-free of that, but we also weren't like the types of people that would have sabotaged somebody else's. We would have taken people with us had we gotten that chance, and we always did at every opportunity. And now with the reunions, we're still doing that. But we were definitely victim of the people on the hierarchy chain that were like above us, that made sure that we weren't going to get there. That's not to say we were totally innocent. We didn't play ball. Revelation wanted to put a sticker on our record that said like, for fans of this, this, and that. And we were like, no. Because, we knew that we could have banked on being part of that, but we really didn't want a sticker on our album that was saying like, for fans of the X band, because then it would seem like we were not leaders, I guess, and followers. And to put a sticker on our album of saying that we're comparing ourselves to bands that opened up for us was not something, and not just, it's not about whether they opened up for us or not. It's just like stylistically, we were not influenced by these bands. So there was a lot of that happening. So it was frustrating. Nobody was working with us for the real end goal that we were trying to find. So it was either compromise or it was one or the other. Either like fall in line or you're on your own. You know what I mean?
Right. Wow.
There's a George Fuller, General George Fuller.
George Fuller.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about him? Because it's like a full, solid 4-minute interview with him. I don't know anything about him or actually, could you just tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, no. He so that 4.5 minute or whatever time frame that we gave him was to kind of tell the history of Long Island hardcore in one swoop, to give some context to like what our scene is. And his role in the scene was that he was in a early generation Long Island hardcore band called Clockwise. Now, Clockwise contained the guitar player of who would eventually form Taking Back Sunday. They were Clockwise, and the members of Clockwise were guys who were in Long Island and playing shows or going to shows in the 80s. The mid to late 80s and then became the architects of the 90s scene that would have led to the scene that all of our bands and the bands that I mentioned from our era spawned from. And those bands that he mentions when he's talking about the scene would have been Silent Majority, who ultimately is responsible for bands like Taking Back Sunday and Brand New and Movie Life, why they sound the way they do, why they probably started to be like them, and Crime in Stereo. There's a million bands. These are great bands, by the way, not taking away from what they do, but Silent Majority and Glassjaw. Any single member of any of those bands, if you ask them, they're going to tell you that that's the band that they were trying to be like when they started their band. So General George was there to provide that sort of explanation, of what the roots of our scene were, and he goes into other bands as well. So they're all connected, and him providing that background, I think, was sort of helpful in the same way that people sort of pumping us up could help explain what you're about to watch, especially somebody that doesn't know who we are. And furthermore, he was a audio engineer. He was a very big audio engineer. He worked at a place called Pi Studios. He worked on What If God Was One of Us by
Joan Osborne? Was that Joan Osborne?
Yeah, so he worked on Joan Osborne's album. And he also worked on several Cyndi Lauper records. He had access to two studios, Pi Studios in Long Island and Magic Shop in New York City, which is a huge studio that everyone from like David Bowie to Foo Fighters to Bjork, so in the downtime of both of those studios when no one was using it, especially at night, he would invite bands like On the Might of Princes and Taking Back Sunday and other bands from the scene to Silent Majority as well, and probably more than I'm forgetting, but like we used like either leftover time, we meaning like the collective scene that were friends with them, we would use leftover time or unused time or like seasons of like downtime at these famous studios, and he would bring us in there and record our demos and help us with pre-production or stuff. So he was like he was like a rock amongst a lot of the bands. I wish I had more time in the movie to explain this stuff. So like, I knew in my mind that it was going to be tough for like people to understand, why am I listening to this guy talk? Who is this guy? You know what I mean? But I also figured most people watching it would be watching it on purpose and not just stumbling on it. So they'd have some background into the band in at least some small shape or form. Well, I should mention too, like there is a documentary that's being worked on. I'm not associated with it at all, but it's called There's Something in the Water, and it's a documentary about the Long Island hardcore scene. And it's so vital because there's documentaries about every scene. And I have to say, when you watch these documentaries of every scene, like DC, New York City, California, etc., they're all great, but the Long Island scene missing from that is so shitty because our bands, like not my band, but the bands from our scene in the 2000s were actually the first bands to become mainstream for the genres of whatever emo and screamo, before all of the other bands that are now sort of these stadium bands. It was the bands from Long Island. So like, these people making the documentary, I think probably that's part of the reason why, is to be like, hey, not only are we here, but like we're a huge part of the story. You know what I'm saying? And that's always why our the chip on our shoulder exists, is because we're right next to New York City, but we kind of like get skipped over for some reason, even though like our bands had such a big part of like, being a culprit to a lot of the stuff that you that still exists on the radio today.
Multiple band members acknowledge in the film, Sunny Day Real Estate gets brought up a lot, and I wonder if, because I think for me, I will say for me personally, Jeremy Enoch's vocal was the first time I realized that you can flip back and forth between melody and the energy and screaming, and have the energy and screaming still be melodic. Enoch maybe has the most melodic scream of any vocalist I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I think that spoke to so many people, myself included, and spawned, generations of music. Not unlike Kurt Cobain, but just on a more underground niche level. Well, actually, that's not true. I mean, like Paramore is an arena band, and they cover Sunny Day Real Estate. So it actually did break through, but. At the time, I think in the 90s, for what you're hearing, you're either like, it's either grunge, in terms of popular music, or to an extent, I guess like Smashing Pumpkins was probably the closest thing to like maybe what Sunny Day Real Estate kind of had in their ingredients, melodic vocals and sort of somber, beautiful melodies. But aside from that, it's like, Perry Farrell and Jane's Addiction had a similar vocal delivery, but there's like still an element of rock starness. Now with Sunny Day, I think it's four guys in t-shirts and jeans, and it's not Alice in Chains or Nirvana. It's something that's like speaking to you on like a level of like, a dark place, but also like, and it's touching parts of your soul that are not the same as like, you go to like a Soundgarden show, you might want to blaze a joint, or if you see an Alice in Chains show or a Jane's Addiction show, you might want to like, get fucking shitty at the bar and like you're at like, it's like party time. But with Sunny Day, it's like there's something deeper and darker and just gut wrenching.
I saw a local band a couple nights back. I'm curious to know your thought on the genre. They describe themselves as a prog band. And when I think prog, my brain goes, King Crimson and Rush, I think first before, and there's other bands, of course, I don't want to dismiss the genre, but they said, we're a prog band. And the kid had a Claudio shirt on. And I immediately pegged it. I went, oh yeah, there's Coheed in there. Coheed's definitely an influence. So it's so interesting to me to say, On the Might of Princes, I don't know that without On the Might of Princes, you would have Coheed and Cambria. And here I am watching a band that doesn't exist without Coheed. So you're now like multiple generations down of influence. I wonder if prog, and to tie it all together, I wonder if prog was something that even entered your heads back then, because there is a mathy, the guitars are trying to eschew those musical norms of 4/4 time.
That's absolutely 100% on purpose and accurate. And also Coheed, I definitely don't want to make it seem like we had influence on them, but we played with them and they did like us a lot. And so, I think they had a great proggy sound to them that also was probably coming from a similar place, because our bass player, Tommy, is really into Rush and King Crimson. And so still is. So we were into a lot of shit that I think later on sort of ended up kind of finding its way into different types of subgenres. Like we were really into that stuff. And he was also really into shoegaze, but Lush and Cocteau Twins and stuff like that. So the prog thing also, I think, was something that our guitar player Lou, he's into flamenco guitar. So he grew his nail. He has really long nails, and he would do acoustic, classical, and flamenco stuff, which is a lot of stuff in weird odd time signatures. So the combination of the two of them, I think, brought a progginess to the band. And then we also really liked the Mars Volta at the time, that was sort of coming out. So yeah, I mean, there's one more thing too, and I don't know that this is a prog band, but when we were making Sirens, our last record, our producer, in an effort to calm us down, because there was a lot of fighting and tension, he had this sort of funny Rick Rubin moment with us, where he kind of was like, all right, what do I do to get these guys to just sit in a room and not fight and relax? And he goes, have you guys ever watched Pink Floyd live at Pompeii? And it was just introducing a different subject to whatever was going on. And I think all of us were like, no. And he's like, all right, whatever you guys are doing, let's just, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I got to show this to you guys, because I think it's really going to inspire you.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's weird that you brought that up too, because I was just watching footage of the reunion shows that we did last week that someone played. And we added a keyboard player, and I was watching a part of it, and I was like, this is so weird. I feel like we were a little bit more proggy than I realized.
We were trying to change something. The music industry, the way we live, to be accepted any way we want to,
So the band is functioning again.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're still navigating what that means today, but the reunion shows that we did were in an effort to promote the movie. I'm still figuring out streaming, but the movie at the moment is just sort of making its way to different theaters. When it plays at the theater, it seems like a great idea for people to watch us play live. And we were only supposed to do 2 shows that turned into 3 shows. And I feel like there's opportunity for us now to have that door open, but we just haven't figured out what that is yet. But I would like to find special opportunities, not just sort of get back to it. I want it to be something where it's like a very special occasion to celebrate something or be part of something.
I got one last question for you, Chris, and I know we're running over time. Emily Ruff, her participation, my read, and I don't think I'm alone on this, is that she's very defensive. Was she angry about you guys making the documentary?
No, not at all. I mean, she gave us her blessing to do everything that we're doing. But I think naturally when your partner is no longer around, that in a situation where there's a band or something that is left behind that is going to be discussed in a podcast or in sort of documentary fashion in any facet, it's important to do your best to represent the person that's not there. And honestly, I have had struggles with that myself, because I'm the most sort of vocal person that would be asked to do something like this on behalf of the band. And at any point in time, I never want to like misrepresent something that I can't truly represent. And I think that in her participation, what's interesting about it is that when she provided me with that information, there's I wouldn't say she's angry, but I think she definitely, I wouldn't even use that word at all about it, but I think defensive only in the sense of like, how can I do my best to speak for somebody who's not here in a movie? And what was also interesting about the quote that she gave that ends the film is that it wasn't purposed to end the film. I gave everybody a set of unique questions to answer, and whether they wanted to film themselves or just give me a voice recording of it, I would listen to the answers to those questions and then find a way in a chronological order that they would make into a sensible story. And that quote that I took from her was just coincidentally perfect for how to end the film, because even in the question I asked, I didn't know what her answer was going to be. I asked her to talk about his death and how it happened because she was there when it happened, and so she really just sort of generously elaborated and then sort of went into deeper thoughts on the matter. So when I heard it, I was like, "That's the end of the film, clearly." The only thing I would say that was uncomfortable was that we didn't leave on good terms. She was there in the room when we had our final band rehearsal, when we were trying to write new songs and when we were rehearsing to play a show. And she was there when he had an outburst and like left, and then we never saw him again ever. So like she was there for that. She was there for when he passed away. And because me and Jason, or really most of us, I think Tommy might have still had an opportunity to like at least be cool with him before he passed. I think the rest of us did not get that opportunity. So I just wasn't really comfortable really reaching out during the time. I mean, we saw each other, there was a memorial, but I wasn't comfortable like staying in touch or reaching out because we didn't really have a relationship, Jason and I. Therefore, I didn't really have a relationship with her. So when it came time to make a documentary, reaching out and asking questions about his death when I didn't do that in the first place was something that was uncomfortable for me and probably for her. But then once I explained why that was the case, I think hopefully it made more sense to her. I'm assuming it did because we just spent an entire weekend hanging out and it was amazing. But I just didn't have the comfort level with him and like his life really, unfortunately, at all. I mean, we were just sort of there was too much heavy baggage to like, just like, I just knew that he had passed away, and we definitely all like sort of did our best to put together some sort of memorial for him. But like, I never actually asked for the details of like what took place that day until it was time to make this film, which, some people could be like, that's kind of shitty, but like, it was just an uncomfortable conversation. But I knew I had to have that conversation when I wanted to tell the story, obviously. So it was tough. Yeah.
It's really important context. And as you say, it's kind of the punctuation mark at the end of the film.
It was crazy when I heard that, man. I had goosebumps when I was like playing back the tapes and I heard that. I was like, oh my Lord, this is like, because I didn't really even know how I was going to end the film aside from the obvious, but like how to present it, who would be talking, what the words would be, And so when I heard that, I was like, there it is. I mean, yeah.
So I can say, without bias, the documentary is really damn good. If you are a fan of any of the bands that we have mentioned, Taking Back Sunday, Sunny Day Real Estate, The Promise Ring, Knapsack, the list goes on and on and on. Coheed and Cambria. If you like any of those bands and you have not checked out On the Mitre Princes, the documentary is the best place to start. It sets the tone, and you'll probably be like me. I had heard, I think For Meg was the only thing I was really familiar with. I went back and listened to the whole catalog because of the documentary and found a lot of great music in there that was missing in my life. So it's tremendous work, man. It's obviously a passion for you.
Congratulations. I think it's just a great documentary. I really, really do. Congrats.
Really, really means a lot, guys. And Keith, like, I got to say, like, knowing that you didn't know too much about the band and that you are such a fan of documentaries coming from you, that means a lot. And Jeff, always thanks to you, man. We're going to be back in Nashville at some point, so we'll definitely hang in person.
Hell yeah.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
Take care, Chris.
Good weekend, guys.
You too, man.
Many thanks to Chris for stopping by. If you're interested in having a showing of Hold On to a Time Where You Live, we've included a link in the show notes section to contact the right people.
This episode of Abandoned Albums was written and produced by Keith R. Higgins and Jeff Calhoun. The show was recorded at Thunder Love Studios, where it was engineered by
Daphne Miller,
with help from
John Thomas.
Abandoned Albums was edited by
Mike Hunt.
The songs you heard during this podcast were The Swell and the Breaking, Go Fuck Yourself, The Water versus the Anchor, and For Meg. You can stream On the Might of Princes wherever you stream your favorite music. We've included links to the On the Might of Princes Bandcamp page and many of the other bands mentioned in this episode in the show notes section. You'll also find links to all of Chris's various projects. Please remember to support your favorite independent artists.
original music by Mike Pellegrino.
Our theme song is All I Want by Pete Belasco. In the opening of the show, the songs you heard were Livin' in a Dream by Archangels, Think Too Hard by Sid Straw, and Stronger Than Love by James Carr.
If you like what you've heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really does help. Thanks for listening.
Grazie.
Bailey Leaf, Rob Janicki, Mike Pellegrino, Therina Vella, Ronnie Barnett, S.W. Loudon, Michael Janicki, Peyton Janicki, and our executive producer,
Rufus Thunderlove.
Abandoned Albums receives funding from Kramerica Industries. Protect what you value. Kramerica Industries, made in America by Americans, mostly, and headquartered in America. Kramerica.com.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always obediently yours.
Abandoned Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.